Everybody, Corey Gemini Guitar, and we are back for some doom metal. So in this lesson we'll be looking at what I would describe as arcane melodies because they've got that dark, mysterious sort of sound about them, and they're a lot of fun to play. So we begin with a very easy sequence of the power chords, which is straightforward enough, from E to F and then to G sharp or A flat. And then back to the G power chord. So the business end of things is we're going to start in the 7th position, and we're going to be loosely basing this around an E minor sort of sound, but we'll be introducing flatted fifths throughout, and so that gives it a darker characteristic because of that tritone interval. If you don't know what the tritone is, if you play an E root note on the 7th fret on the 5th string, and you play the 8th fret on the 4th string, that is the tritone. The reason it's called a tritone is because it is 3 whole steps away from the root note. And it's probably the darkest interval in music, at least Western music. So we begin in the 7th position, as previously discussed. So I'm using the root, the 5th, the minor 6, and the flatted 5th. We're going to take this up just a half step because we're going to follow the progression. So when we went from E to F, we're going to move the idea up a half step. E to F is a half step, beginning at fret 8 on the 5th string. And this time we're going to play around with it a bit. So we're going to do the root and the 5th. And then we're going to do the flattened 5th first and then return back up so we get to the minor 6. So it's worth noting that the notes we're using are essentially the same pattern. We're just reordering them a little bit. So far we get. So proceeding from here, we will be at the 11th position on the 11th fret on the 5th string. This time we're adopting just a minor sound. We're not going to use the flatted 5th, and we're also going to use the octave on the 3rd string at fret 13. So this is a very melancholy idea, and it sounds great on its own. You could also introduce the flatted 5th there like I just did, and that gives it that spooky sort of sound as well. Moving along, we will be going to the 12th position. Sorry, the 10th position. We're going backwards. So we're following the chord progression. And we're pretty much going to do the same thing, but just a half step lower. We just do the same thing from 11th to 10th. Now the second time through will be a little bit different in some parts. I think it's just the second bar. Let's have a look. So the next cycle through, starting at the 7th position again. That's identical to the previous part we played. When we move up to the 8th position, I've got a feeling it's different. Oops. It is. So we moved from the 9th to the 10th fret, whereas before we moved from the 10th to the 9th. And it's worth experimenting with different ways of sequencing these notes, and that way then you'll make it your own and find something that fits your own tastes. After that, it's all the same. So 11th to 10th position, same as what we just looked at a little while ago. And then my favourite part is the flatted 5th arpeggio sequence. So we've got a root note in the 7th position, flatted 5th, the higher octave root, and the flatted 5th. And we're also going to have the 5th on the 7th fret on string 1. So essentially this is just 2 notes repeating in a weird kind of dark way. So this is from bar 17, and it would sound like this in the 7th position. Now, as far as the technique stuff goes, what you'll want to make sure is just make sure your first finger wraps across the strings here so that you don't get any unwanted noise. And also make sure that the tip of the first finger is just jammed under a little bit of the 6th string. That's basically the way I play all the time. Unless I'm playing something on the higher strings, then my right hand will take over on the lower strings, just resting on those to mute them. And so that'll get you the clearest possible sound. So I'd recommend playing with as much gain as possible here, because that's going to kind of rat out if you're not muting to the best of your abilities. So you'll need to work on that if you aren't. But using the finger wrap technique and the finger jammed under, and if you want, you can rest your hand there when you're not using the lower strings, and you'll be fine. There my finger's wrapping across, but it's not pressing down. So with this, we're essentially just going to move the same idea around to fit the progression. So it's the same pattern, just in a different part of the fretboard. 11th position. 10th position. And repeat. And that is basically it. So it's a lot of fun to practice. Like I said, make sure that you experiment with the sequencing of the notes so that you can come up with as many variations as possible, which is what you should always do, whether you're learning one of my lessons or a song by a band or whatever. Always try to come up with a way to internalize it and then to grow it out into something that you can make your own. And in doing so, you'll improve your songwriting abilities. And if nothing else, you'll have some fun. So thanks for supporting me on Patreon, and I'll see you soon for the next lesson. Until then, bye for now.